Adnan Adrian Wood Smith. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Doing well. Alhamdulillah, praise God. Glad to be here.
Brilliant. I've been really looking forward to this conversation, so I'm very excited. Thank you for joining us. Adnan, I wanted to start with talking about your conversion to Islam. It's a very fascinating story that I think viewers will really appreciate, especially in this month of Ramadan. I think people will love to hear even more so. But before we get into that, would you just mind telling us a little bit about your background, what you're doing at the moment, but also what you were doing prior to your conversion?
Sure. Yeah. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Wassalatu Wassalamu ala Rasulin Kareem. I start in the name of God, the most deeply and widely merciful. All praises due to God and peace and prayers upon His beloved messenger. So, right now, I run a coaching program that helps people discover their sacred mission in life and align around that. And that overall is a function of what I'm just trying to do in the community of just building up and inspiring the next generation of lay leadership, if you will, in the Muslim community. And so I have various projects just on the back burner that I'm working on currently right now. And then I'm also working on finishing my PhD in Islamic Studies at Harvard University. And I'm a father of three and I homeschool them. So that's what I'm up to right now.
Oh my God, how do you balance everything?
It's the $1 million question. I mean, just try as best I can not to be the perfectionist that I naturally am, and do what
Yeah,
I can in each realm, and just try to be present fully with each aspect that I'm working on.
of course.
Yeah.
Adnan, the projects that you are involved in, do you have like social media links, websites, anything that we can share on in the notes? Because I think it'd be good if people could tap into it and maybe follow what you're doing.
Sure. Right now, I'm most active on LinkedIn and Facebook. LinkedIn a little more. You can find me there, Adnan Wood Smith. Slowly getting on to other platforms that I just want to reach people on. But right now, those are the main ones that I'm involved in. And then I have a website for the program that we're currently running, greaterwhy.com. So if anyone's interested, they can head there and or just hit me up on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I'm pretty responsive.
Yes, the Great Divide Project is. I kind of read into a little bit. I watched your videos and it's fascinating. I'd like to talk about it in
Mm.
this podcast as well, so that people can get a flavor. Before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about? So, at the time when you converted, you were apparently working for the FBI. What was going on?
Well, yeah. So you're right. I was during that time, or during those first few years, I had the aspiration of being a special agent in the FBI. That was an aspiration that I held from eighth grade in school. So, for those not familiar with the American school system, that was about age 13 onwards. I knew from that point I had this crystal clear clarity that I'm going to be an FBI agent. That's what I'm going to do. And so that was my aspiration in life for a long time. I also was really interested and gifted at academics in general, and particularly in languages. And so when a family friend of mine who had done work with the FBI was advising me of what to consider studying at university, I said to him, "What should I study?" He said, "Well, so this was just a year or two after 9/11. And after the excoriation that had happened of the FBI and other national intelligence organizations for not having any clue what was going on and not being able to predict the tragedy there, they were desperately looking for Arabic and Persian speakers. And so my family friends said, look, if you study Arabic or Persian, or ideally both, then you'll be a shoo-in into the organization. You'll get in, no questions. And so I said, well, okay, great. I love languages. I'm up for a challenge. It would be great to learn a language that has a different script. So it was at that point, too, that I developed an interest in the Arabic language as well. So I knew going into university that I wanted to study Arabic. I was going to be an Arabic major. was toying between university in the US and the UK, and eventually went to an open day at University of Edinburgh. And the director of Oriental Studies at University of Edinburgh was a Dartmouth grad, and he said, "No, go to Dartmouth in the US." So I found myself an Arabic major at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. And so my first year, knew I was going to be an Arabic major, knew I had to fulfill certain requirements for that major. So I found myself taking a course on Arab culture. And of course, so much of Arab culture is infused with Islam. Islam is a huge part of that. And so that was the first time I had been exposed to Islam on a deep level, beyond just a high school world cultures textbook that mentioned the 5 pillars, and that was it. I had grown up Christian my whole life, and a pretty committed Christian. God was always the most important thing to me. My relationship with God was always first and foremost, and I was passionate about putting my whole self into my relationship with my Creator. But growing up, I found it difficult. Every time I tried to put my whole self into the path to my Creator that I was given, that I was taught, i.e. Christianity, and that's 2 different strands of Christianity that I was exposed to and a part of from an early age. On the one hand, there was the church that we went to on a regular basis growing up, and there was partly my choice to go to. So I was born in the UK, but mostly grew up here in the US in Minnesota. And so when my mother moved with me to Minnesota, one of the first things I said, "Mom, we need to find a church. I want to get baptized. We need to find a church." So I was the one who the impetus came from to find that church. But the church that we were involved in was what's called high church tradition. So it was all classical music and a choir and 2 massive organs, one in the front and one in the back. And it was a very, very formal experience. Anyone who had any role in the service wore specific robes. Anyone else in the congregation men had to wear suits and ties, even the kids did, and then the women wore dresses. So it was that formalized high church tradition that I had in my church. And then at the same time, I was going to a Christian evangelical school formed by the Covenant denomination of Christianity. So that was a very different experience of Christianity, which was much more emotional, much more down to earth, much more about viewing God and Jesus Christ as your buddy, and spend time, and it just, there were parts of it that really put me off in a way. And parts of both experiences that signaled to me that I couldn't give my whole self to this tradition, because I was there at church, and being a youth leader in that environment at church, I was one of a few. I mean, when I reflect back on it, there was hardly anyone. I don't know if I could point to any other youth that I found in the church that I felt like was really taking this thing seriously.
One thing, so at that very early age, how did you become so inclined towards religion? Was it your family influence? Was it the school that you went to, or was it friends or neighborhood where you lived?
No, I mean, it was a personal interest, just always growing up with a sense that, look, my Creator created me, and he gave me everything that I have. And so it's my responsibility to get right with him and to figure out what that means. And so the one access point I had for that was the church and the Christian environments that I grew up in.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I tried to give my whole self at church, and then I would have time alone with the pastors there, and just spending time with them in private. It seemed clear to me that they weren't really able to give their full selves to this. Like, I remember asking a question one time of the head pastor of the church. I asked that. I said, "Look, my father I don't think he's going to heaven because he's involved in all kinds of just Eastern religions in general. He dabbles a bit in Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism and Hinduism. I said, I don't think he's going to heaven because he doesn't accept Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. What should I do? How do I handle that? And the response I got from the pastor was, well, many people find Jesus in Buddhism. And that was the kind of question, that was the kind of answer that were provided at that church, things that sounded intellectually stimulating, but you break them apart and you're like, this doesn't help me at all. What are you talking about? Like, here we are at church saying that the path to salvation is Jesus Christ. And then you tell me that my father, who grew up in an Anglican church, and then went to something else, that he can find Jesus in Buddhism. Like, that sounds interesting and it sounds provocative, but it doesn't help
What
me
does it
at
mean?
all. And then compare that to the experience I had at school, going to chapel every Thursday. It was an experience. So we had a praise band up at the front of the chapel. So there were drums and guitars and singing and really emotional. And to be honest, it was people there. Now, just a handful of people, just a few people I knew in that school who really took their religion seriously, really took Christianity seriously. But when I look back on that and think about who those people were, it was people involved in those kind of emotional, passionate experiences of religion. And when it came to actual intellectual engagement, it was just the only way they could survive, essentially, is just being like, la, 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 la. I think for some reason, I think that's actually a reason why why many evangelical Christian movements these days have a key component of their tradition being speaking in tongues. Because literally, it's like you have to go to a different place in your mind to be able to process all this. Like those kind of people you bring up, well, what about New Testament historical scholarship? And they go, blah, 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 blah. They just start speaking. Like, I didn't have that experience of them speaking in tongues, but I was just reflecting on it recently, of that place you're brought to of losing your mind a bit to connect with God. That's the general ethos of that tradition, that isn't able to deal with the intellectual arguments against the confusion of the Trinity, all of the historical argument for why the New Testament is a corrupted version of the original message of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, and all the historical inaccuracies in the Bible. And so I couldn't give my whole self to either of these main traditions that I came across. And so it was when I was exposed to Islam that first year.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, yes, my experience is just talking to friends, because I have family members who are converted to Islam, and then obviously their families who are still non-Muslims. And just my personal kind of experience is that there's just so much confusion, intellectual confusion outside of Islam. We can talk about like how the rationality of Islam later on in your talk, but even reading like intellectuals like Bertrand Russell, and how he used to go into deep depression, and they call it the human condition, because they assume that is basically it. Every human being has to go through that kind of that process, whereas that doesn't exist in Islam, and a lot of people don't realize. They think this is it. Basically, things just don't make sense, and that's just how it is.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's much of Western society as you have it. The assumption that the Western experience of life, and with religion in general, is everyone's experience.
Yes.
And therefore, the place that we've arrived in the West, in terms of separation of church and state, in terms of secularism, in terms of capitalism, and these various things that are underpinnings of Western society, that these are the pinnacle of where we can get at in human society. But it's really, it displays an inability to understand that other civilizations and cultures actually have legitimate answers to these kind of things.
Hello, I hope you're enjoying the episode. Usually around this time, I would take a minute's break to introduce our sponsors for the day. However, today I wanted to do something slightly different. I wanted to introduce you to a friend of the podcast, Taryn Smith. Taryn is an on-screen and voiceover actress and a spokesperson. If you've ever been in a situation where you wished that you could find someone professional, reliable, and presentable who could speak on your or your company's behalf in front of a camera, then do go and have a look at Taryn's social media. I'm going to leave a link in the description. If you feel Taryn's going to be a good fit for you or your company, then get in touch with her. Let her know you got her details from the Afghanistan podcast, and I'm sure she'll give you a good deal. I'm getting no monetary benefit from this shout out, and the only reason I'm doing this is because I'm actually a fan of her work. I have worked with Taryn before. I think she's really good, and I think more people should know about her services. If you're also involved in a project that you're proud of and you think would benefit from a referral on this podcast, then do get in touch and let's see what we can do. Thank you. And now let's get back to the podcast. So when you started studying Arabic, so the first time you started studying Arabic, was it at university, or did you prepare a little bit before and do some course or something?
I mean, I did. I tried to learn everything I could. So I picked up 2 books from the local Barnes and Noble bookstore when I was in high school. And so there's one book on the Arabic alphabet and then another one on just basic Arabic phrases. And so I had done my best to teach myself the Arabic alphabet and get familiar with it, and had still deep questions such as, what is this ain? What is this? How do you pronounce this letter?
That's what I was going
Because
to
I couldn't
say.
figure it out from reading the book.
Yes. I mean, it's such a huge shock to the system because it's a completely different kind of, even the direction of the text is from an opposite way to what we're used to with like Latin. So I thought maybe preparing for it was a good thing, but maybe preparing for it, it's amazing it didn't put you off thinking this is just too difficult.
No, I love the challenge, and I found the form of the language in its letters and the sounds and everything else. I found it so beautiful. Yeah, I knew I wanted to devote my life to it in a way.
Amazing. So how was it at university? Like, did you struggle, or did you also, because after university you went and studied a lot more Arabic and Islamic text and knowledge? Looking back, what you learned at university, was it a decent kind of level of Arabic?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what I would have done without the foundation in Arabic that I had at university. We had a really good Arabic program at Dartmouth. One of the interesting things about it was that they didn't offer second year Arabic. They offered first year, then third year, and then fourth year. And the reason for that was that they encouraged you to, if you wanted to go further in Arabic, you would have to spend summer intensive abroad, doing some kind of language immersion experience to get your second year done, and then come back and do your third year at Dartmouth. Yes. And so that was a great experience just from the beginning. So I'm sorry, I'm often long-winded, and we have a few threads to tie up. Do you mind if I just mention coming to Islam my freshman year now?
Yes.
And of course, feel free to interrupt me at any point, especially because of how long-winded I can tend to be. But it was in my first year of college that, then taking this Arab culture course, being exposed to Islam on a deeper level, that I got to know what Islam was about and how much it made sense. And just not only how much it made sense, but how simple it was and comprehensive at the same time. That it didn't take all this intellectual gymnastics to justify the theological underpinnings of this whole thing, which is what I was used to. And so it was then in that class on Arab culture, being exposed to Islam on a deeper level, that I realized, oh, this is the kind of thing that I've been looking for my whole life, because this is the kind of thing that I could put my whole self into and just give all of myself to. One of my favorite verses in the Quran is in Surah Al-Baqarah. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu udkhulu fi as-silmi kaffah. O you who believe, enter into Islam wholeheartedly. Enter into submission fully. Because I felt that for once I could actually go fully into this thing, which was contrary to anything that I had before. For once, I remember joining a Muslim community, going to Jummah the first time there at Dartmouth College, and being there afterwards. First of all, just the form of the service made so much more sense than what was called worship for me growing up in Christian context. And then afterwards, just I felt like I could see the light, I could see the nur on other people's faces, and I just felt like, wow, this is the kind of community that I really want to be a part of. And it breaks my heart now having experience in the Muslim community and knowing so many young Muslims in particular who have the kind of experience of Islam that I did with Christianity, in terms of the version of Islam or the way things are presented to them in their community or by the people of knowledge that they're exposed to, just don't resonate with them, aren't relevant to them, they can't fully get on board with.
Yes.
Doesn't really make sense. Yeah, my heart goes out to many of those Muslims in that position, because that's not what I found my first time. And then only later, coming out of college, had experience in certain communities where, yeah, I don't connect with this. There's a disconnect here. But what I found in that Muslim college community was a sense of, oh, I can put my whole self into that. And so after about 2 months of looking into it, I took my Shahada, the second Jamaat I was at. So then by the time I was doing that second year summer intensive as part of my Arabic course, I was now in a Muslim majority country, in Jordan at the time, having been Muslim a month.
Right.
And so immediately had that experience now as a Muslim convert, now being in a majority Muslim country, which was incredibly formative for me.
Who were you? Did you have like someone there that could advise you before you went there, or do you just kind of go completely into like an unfamiliar environment where you didn't have any personal connections?
Yeah, I mean, it was an American program, run through University of Virginia. So they had support for us in terms of an orientation beforehand, before we got on the plane, and then there was constant support just helping us navigate the culture. And sure, there was a lot of cultural shock and lots of
Yeah.
things to learn.
When
But there was support, and then at the same time too, I'm so grateful for certain people that Allah just happened to place in my life. So I was there studying. It wasn't in Amman, in the capital of Jordan. It was north of there, in a town called Irbid, at the University of Yarmouk. And I would go to the mosque there on campus at Jamiat al-Yarmouk. And one of the first brothers I met there happened to be a Jordanian American brother who was there for the summer, but grew up in Detroit, in Michigan. And so that, I don't know what I would have done without a brother like that, who was helping also. I had someone like him in my life who was helping me as a new Muslim understand what's important, what's not. Do I need to dress this certain way? No, don't worry about that. Just worry about your salah, that kind of thing.
How did your family take it when you did convert to Islam?
You know, I think I was more apprehensive about telling them than I needed to be. It took a while. And the first family member I told about, I didn't particularly do it in a particularly intelligent way. My mother was on the phone with me that evening after I had taken my Shahada, and I called her up, and this was really before, well, I suppose we had cell phones, but I called her on the home line, and she was just heading out the door, and she said, "Can it wait?" I said, well, I just want to tell you, I've converted to Islam. She said, what?
See you later.
We'll talk about this later. I have to go to this Bach Society concert. So I didn't really do it. And plus, the only thing that she knew about me contextually, to contextualize that, was that was probably my most stressful week of my first year of college. I ended up dropping a class that week. And so she thought that I'd just gone off my rocker a bit and was doing something crazy just because of my lack of intelligence in there. But for the most part, my family was just, religion was never too important to them. I mean, my mother's side of the family, they were involved in the church, more from kind of a musical standpoint in terms of always being in the choir and that kind of thing. But religion was never really a huge topic for us, or talking about salvation or that kind of thing. So I didn't really hear much from the rest of my family once they caught on and heard that I was Muslim.
Cool. So you went to Jordan then. By this time, you're still thinking that your future, your career is going to be in the FBI, and that's kind of the direction you're still aiming at.
Yeah, so from age 13 onwards, my aspiration was to be an FBI agent. And it's that aspiration which led me to study Arabic, and then it was my study of Arabic that then led me to Islam. And so by my junior year, so my third year of university, I found myself, I had applied for internships with the FBI, and so I had a top secret clearance and worked first in Washington, D.C. At an undisclosed location. I I'm not at liberty to say where I was for another 10 years, then it becomes unclassified.
It's a tough process, and the recruitment, no? You must have been pretty good to have been selected.
Yeah, I mean, from age 13 onwards, I had prepared my whole life to be able to do that. So training physically, as well as just learning what the whole application process and selection process was for the internships, and then to be able to move on to a special agent position. So yeah, I had done a lot of preparation.
It's lucky that you had that kind of dream ahead of you. Like, I remember when I finished, like when I was about to go to university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And yeah, I think that's a really good place to be, where you have a clear idea of what you're aiming for and you're preparing for it.
Even as a Brit in the British system. Or wait, did you do university in the UK, or was it elsewhere?
No, I've been all over the place. So I did my undergraduate in Pakistan.
Okay.
In computer science. No, sorry, in stats and economics. Then I came to England. Then I did my undergraduate again. I thought I'm just going to do it again, and I did it in computer science.
Okay.
Then I did my GDL, which is like a diploma in law. And then I did my master's in international relations. So I've been all over the place.
Okay. Well, I always remember growing up, having a British father and an American mother, always weighing for myself whether I should be in the English system or the American system. And it always seemed like in the English system, where you focus, you have your O levels and then the A levels and then university, it's this increasing level of focus which helps you understand what to do. As I always thought the stereotypical American was the one who comes to college not knowing what they're going to do with their life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a pretty clear aspiration, pretty clear life trajectory when I became Muslim, and then those first few years of Islam. But then it was Islam ultimately, and it was the experience that Islam gave me with diverse perspectives with relationship to the power structure that I'd never had before as a white upper middle class Midwesterner living in the US. And then also, once again, having a tradition like Islam, which I could give myself wholeheartedly to without holding anything back, then started to slowly expose to me how shallow my engagement with my career aspiration was. And so then I found myself a few years after becoming Muslim, then in a place of realizing I can't do this anymore. I've seen too much. I understand too much. in terms of how power works and geopolitics in the world, and understanding what my place would be in that were I to be a part of an organization like the FBI. And so I had to leave that aspiration, and ultimately floundered for many years, not really knowing what to do with my life after having such a clear sense of career aspiration. So I almost hear from you, Tafhim, by almost like a sense of like, oh, I wish I'd had that direction, being young.
Yeah.
But there's a problem with having that much direction. In fact, I was just speaking to a brother the other day, brother in Bangladesh, who was planning for the I think going into a military career there, and ultimately wasn't able to follow through on that. When the obstacles come, when the doors get blocked, when Allah has something else for us in store, and saves us from a path which wouldn't have been good for us, when you have that crystal clear aspiration, and it's based on a particular job or a particular thing that you're going to accomplish, it can lead to a real existential crisis when that's prevented from you, which is, I basically had about a decade of existential crisis ahead of me after that.
How long were you in the FBI for, and how easy was it to leave? Because sometimes it's not easy to leave an organization like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was never fully employed by them. I did 2 internships with them, which meant I was just working with them for 3 months, then 4 months at a time. And then I knew I wanted to finish up my studies before going full time into the FBI. And so it was when I was finishing my studies that the clarity really came to me of I can't go through with this aspiration. So I never had a sense that I was consciously had to leave something which was hard to leave.
So what did you do after that then? How did you, in the wilderness, how did you find direction?
Yeah. Well, I found direction. I mean, the other direction and sense of focus that I had in my life growing up, besides wanting to be an FBI agent, besides wanting to be connected to my creator, because I always knew I wanted to find my soulmate as soon as possible and get married and live happily ever after. And so it was at that time that I got married as well. And so my fiance, then wife, was doing a PhD at Berkeley. So when I was trying to figure out, okay, if I'm not going to be in Washington, D.C., being a linguist with the FBI at first, preparing for a special agent position, I guess I'll just head to Berkeley. At the time, I had been listening to lectures from people like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Imam Zaid Shaka around what was Zaytuna Institute, then Zaytuna College. And so just fell into that opportunity, being in Berkeley because my wife was there, and then knowing that Zaytuna and all kinds of great Muslim organizations were there. I found myself working for Zaytuna. But really, those 10 years after I gave up my career aspiration of being an FBI agent was an experience of falling into things and taking up opportunities, not necessarily because I wanted that opportunity, but because there was no other option. And I was more running from something than running to something. And it's because of having been through that experience and now coming out the other side a few years ago. It was really COVID that brought this to a head, going through COVID and having 2 kids and realizing I can't do this as a father and ultimately as a Muslim role model for my children. Just be so unmotivated and lackluster about my approach in this world. Things came to a head and I realized I needed a sense of sacred mission in life. I had a sense of what I like to call vertical why, in terms of my why, my overall sense of purpose with respect to my creator. But what I didn't have was a horizontal why, a sense of mission with respect to the creation. I knew I wanted to serve God, but I didn't know how I was going to serve creation. And you can't really serve God without serving creation in some particular way. And so it was once I was able to gain clarity of that and figure out what I felt I needed my life to be about as long as I was in this world, that things that I was able to get out of that space of just not being motivated, not having much discipline.
That's amazing that you came to that realization yourself. I think people go through a lifetime. I know personally, I've gone through a lifetime kind of not realizing this until quite recently,
Mm.
that I do need some kind of a mission in life. When I speak with non-Muslims and I say, "What's your purpose in life? What are you here for?"
Hmm.
They'll say something like, "I want to. My purpose is to be a musician, or my purpose is to be an architect, or whatever it is." And then when you
Right.
speak to a Muslim, and you'd say, "What's your purpose in life?" and they'll say, "Is to worship Allah Ta'ala," which
Yep.
is which is great. But both of them are missing a little bit of something, and Muslims don't realize that they're missing
Right.
this thing, which is to have a mission that is um, external to themselves, but
Mhm.
directed toward other people. And I think without that, both of those kind of groups of people are going to have a huge bit of something missing from them that's going to cause a big upset in life at some stage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was fortunate to come out of that place, but I don't credit my own acumen or intelligence for taking me out of there ultimately, because I was in that space for 10 years,
Mm.
not thinking that there was anything better. But it was really when I had a near death experience while being a father that drew it out of me, realizing, oh, why don't I have a passion for life, a passion for serving in life? And with the Quran being so important to me in my life, I knew the stories of the prophets and the righteous in the Quran and in our tradition in general, and saw that the example we have set forth for us is not just, it's not just an example of asceticism, of piety, of what Allah mentions in the Quran in terms of rahbaniya, the monasticism, which many Christians went to in terms of not engaging with the world. There's an engagement, there's a stress on one's relationship with one's creator as that key sense of meaning, but also a need to engage in creation. You see, every prophet has a very particular mission that they're striving for. And you're right. I find that a lot of people who don't have Islam or aren't particularly religious, right, their goals in life are all just worldly and about self-actualization and self-accomplishment, which just, yeah, doesn't really get you anywhere, and isn't fulfilling, isn't too fulfilling, just to fulfill one's own sense of self. So to me, the most important thing is that vertical wise is the purpose. But you're right. I find so many Muslims who have that purpose but don't have the mission.
Yeah,
In terms of, when I ask them, yeah, what are you doing in this world? Well, I'm seeking to please Allah. I'm seeking to get into Jannah, into heaven. Okay, great. There's nothing wrong with that. But as I like to say to people, there's also there's a whole bunch of things that aren't right with that as well.
yeah,
In terms of, it's not going to give you that drive for life, and it's going to very easily lead to a comparison game if you don't have a clear sense of how you can uniquely serve, given all your limitations and abilities and everything. And also, it doesn't truly give justice to what Allah has placed you, and Allah has given you a particular life experience for a particular reason, to serve others. And it's just like many of our scholars say, that the statement "La ilaha illallah," there is no God but God, is the hypothetical, that's the theoretical. But the practical implementation of that is the second statement of the Shahada, Muhammadur Rasulullah, that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Similarly, I would argue that a clear sense of serving God and worship is the hypothetical, but it's only really actualized
yeah,
and grounded when it's oriented as well towards a particular form of service to Allah's creation, because that's the ethic that we find in the sayings and the teachings of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is constantly talking about the importance of helping other believers out, helping the unfortunate out, and the importance of that over extra worship that you might do. And one of my favorite sayings of his is him saying, for me just to help, in one narration it's for me to help take care of a need of a brother of mine or a sister of mine. In another narration it's for me to just walk with a brother or sister of mine in need is more beloved to me than a month of worship in this mosque of mine in Medina. It's just that really presses the point that you compare a month of i'tikaf, that means fasting, because from a traditional Islamic legal perspective, the only way you can stay in the mosque is if you're fasting as an act of worship. Fasting, praying, being devoted to worship for a whole month, not just in any mosque, but in the mosque of Medina, the Prophet's mosque, peace be upon him, where rewards are multiplied 10,000 times or more. A month of that compared to a few minutes helping out someone else, that really shows you where our priorities should be in terms of our need. But and then finally too, I find a lot of Muslims, when I ask them, oh, what's your mission in the world, I also hear something common of, well, I want to make a lot of money to be able to give sadaqah, or I want to have this kind of political position to help my community. Things that are tied to checkboxes in this material world, in the dunya, which if they're not fulfilled, what's going to happen to your identity and your direction in life? So that sacred mission, it also needs to be a sense of an overall theme of my life that I already experience as a sense of success, that no one else has to externally validate for me. It doesn't depend on what happens in my life in terms of getting this position or getting this much money or that kind of thing. I already know that this is what my life is about. I have crystal clear focus on that, and that's what I'm going to meet Allah with at the end of the day.
That's amazing. So how, with this in mind, how did you decide what your own mission is then?
Yeah, well, so when I was going through this work 3 or 4 years ago and trying to figure this out for myself, basically what I did was, first of all, the key test I had was the motivation test. I started drafting a mission on the whiteboard in my home, drafting my mission statement, and then I would constantly return to it, particularly when I felt unmotivated and depressed and down. I would return to it and ask myself the question, does this lift me up? Does it give me a sense of how I can move forward and through this state of constriction that I feel right now? But through that process too, it was my experience with the Islamic spiritual traditions, so traditions of tasawwuf or ihsan, of Islamic spirituality, which gave me practical lessons and guidance in terms of how to try to figure out some of these things and then orient my life around this sense of mission that I was slowly getting. And so it's through a bunch of trial and error and then incorporating practical tips from the Islamic spiritual tradition that I felt I was able to do this over years. And so when it came time for me I felt a need to branch out in the community and help others with this and build a program around it. That was just looking at, okay, what helped me and what were the clear teachings which really helped me orient my life in this way and figure out that I'd gotten there. What are the kind of tests that we can put our sacred mission statement through to tell that we've really arrived at it? And
are you able to say what your own mission is then?
Sorry, what was that?
Are you able to share with us what you decided your mission was going to be?
Oh, well, let's see. I actually have 2 different drafts. I'm a little shy of doing it, and partly it's because one of the tests of a real sacred mission statement is that it resonates with you. It doesn't necessarily resonate, like other people might not understand it at all.
Sure.
But one way I can articulate it is to make the land, make the West a land of sacred spirituality. That's one expression of it.
Wow.
Another way to put it too is to help people of sound intellect and soft hearts become people of inspiration and initiative in the community. That's what I'm trying to do in this world.
I remember once I was listening to, I don't know if you know the person Imran Khan, who's was the Prime Minister of Pakistan as well.
Yeah.
Captain.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of his in politics. I'm not a fan of anyone in politics, to be honest.
Yeah.
But he's a very inspirational person in the achievements that he's had throughout his life
Right.
in so many different areas.
Oh yeah.
I
Right.
remember once he was saying how, because he's lived in the UK for a long time and he's very kind of familiar. He studied here in Cambridge, I think, and lived in
Mm.
Chelsea. And once I heard him saying that in the West, everyone's always talking about spirituality, but you can't actually find spirituality practiced anywhere.
Mm.
Whereas in the East, no one talks about it, but everywhere you go, whether it's like a small shopkeeper or a policeman or wherever you go, spirituality is practiced, but they're not constantly talking about it.
Mm.
So that was quite interesting
That's a good
observation.
point. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that really resonates with my experience too, in terms of Christianity or other forms of spirituality that I grew up and was exposed to.
Mm.
It was much of a sense of, okay, that was an interesting sermon. Oh, that's a great point. But what do I do practically now to
Yeah.
implement that in my life? These days I sometimes listen to sermons from popular Christian preachers these days, just to help me improve my craft of speaking in the community and reflect on how to do that effectively. And I heard one pastor in Atlanta, Georgia, a few weeks ago, who was talking about. It was a really interesting talk, and talking about the how we get up in the mornings and we see ourselves in the mirror, and then we prepare for the day. We fix our hair, we floss our teeth, and we moisturize our face. And he said, "Well, how often have you gotten up in the day and flossed your soul?" And so he was talking about the need to prepare spiritually for the day. But then after I listened to that, I just realized, wait, what does it mean to floss your soul? What does that mean? It doesn't help me practically other than understanding, okay, yeah, I should be doing something differently other than just looking at how physically presented I am. But
Yes.
what do I do to present myself spiritually? What really
Yeah.
helps me in that regard? And so, yeah, I found that it's just with Islam, it's a path of deep life transformation when we take it seriously, when we give our whole lives to it. And um it's not just about the outward, it's also the inward, the spiritual aspect.
Mm.
And also too, it's not just about informing our sense of purpose, it's about forming our sense of sacred mission. I hear from brothers and sisters all the time who have a sense of, they have a religious commitment, they have a commitment in deen as they express it, but they
Yeah.
have trouble reconciling that with their involvement in the dunya, and their
Yeah.
involvement in this material world just often seems so meaningless.
It's very true. I find myself quite fascinated in the topic of depression these days.
Mm,
I don't know, maybe I've found quite a lot of people in that kind of state, um, quite often coming to me for advice, and it kind of
mm,
makes me question a lot of things in my own mind. So I'm kind of thinking about these things a lot, and I think there's like it's slightly different with the depression in non-Muslims and Muslims. I think in
mm,
non-Muslims there's a lot of, so we have like Hakukullah and Hakukul Ibad, the rights of God, the right of Allah, and the rights
mhm,
of people. And the non-Muslims, quite often they're missing that Hakukullah that kind of puts them into an existential crisis, kind of what I was
yeah,
talking about Bertrand Russell and everyone kind of goes through,
yeah,
and they just think that this is the human condition, this is what everyone is going through, whereas they're
mhm,
not. Um, Whereas the Muslims, they kind of understand Hukuk Allah, but they're confused with Hukuk al-Ibadah. I know from my own personal life as well, exactly going through what you're talking about, where I was thinking, I was just kind of satisfied with life, and I was just thinking, this is it. Like, I'm happy with what Allah Ta'ala's given me. And if I just keep worshipping Allah, keep remembering Allah, then that's my purpose in life and
mhm,
sorted. But what I was missing is a mission in life, and I didn't realize that a mission in life can be and should be something beyond my own personal needs. It should be something where I go out and help or have a mission to do something over and beyond myself.
right,
And I think there's a huge problem. So I think what you're talking about, um, is definitely a problem. It's going to be a problem for youngsters. So if people watching, what would you advise them? People think going through that kind of a crisis, where do they start? Obviously, they can get in touch with you as well at some level to explore this on a deeper level. But how do we start?
Yeah, great question. Well, yeah, I mean, if anyone might benefit from the resources that we've built, they can head to greaterwhy.com, and we have, if you scroll down, we have a why strength test there, where you can test the strength of your sacred mission. And then if anyone finds it beneficial just to hear from me in various regards, there's a place to sign up for our newsletter there as well, and read more about the program that we run. But that program isn't for everyone necessarily, but everyone, I do believe, really can benefit from having a clear sense of sacred mission. And so in that regard, I would say the one thing that we all need in a way is first of all just to be aware of that question of thinking and reflecting on what is my sacred mission in this world. What am I looking? What is a clear, concise statement of how I am serving God by serving His creation in this world? One of my favorite stories in this regard in the Quran is the story of Musa alayhi salam when he meets the burning bush. So Moses, peace be upon him, and he's basically given two kinds of messages. One is Innani ana Allah fa'budni wa aqimis salata li dhikri. Indeed, I am God. There is no God but I, so worship me and establish the prayer for my remembrance. So he's given that sense of purpose and the need to establish a relationship with Allah and orient his way around that, particularly with a form of prayer. And then he's also told, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Go to Pharaoh. He is indeed an oppressor. And this, if you look at it, this is in a way his mission in the world, is to go to Pharaoh and take care of his oppression. Even when Pharaoh is dead, Moses' mission is still that mission, because Pharaoh, the imprint of Pharaoh, is still left on the hearts of the Israelites, and he finds himself having to root that out from their hearts. And so in that regard, I think it would be beneficial for anyone just to ask themselves the question of what is that statement of my mission in this world, and in terms of what I am doing here, and then ask themselves the question: does this give me motivation? Does this give me clarity? Does it make sense of my life up to this point, in terms of what Allah has been preparing me for, in terms of the interests and abilities, but also the limitations that He's placed on me? And is it something really what we're looking for? I'm grateful to a sister who is in our coaching program who put it a certain way a few months ago when I was speaking with her. She said, "Look, I'm looking to have Allah's vision of my life in my life right now." That, at the end of the day, is what I feel we need to be preparing to do as believers in this world, is understand what is the through line of my life that is going to be the summary of my accounting when I meet my Creator and He summarizes, this is what your life was about. How can I define that for myself now before it's defined for me later, looking back over my life? Along the ethic of the saying of our predecessor Omar, may God be pleased with him, who said, "Weigh yourselves before your deeds are weighed, and take yourselves to account before you're taken to account."
Yeah. So Adnan, upon becoming a Muslim, you've memorized the Quran, have you?
Mm-hmm.
So that and other things that you've learned, how did you go about it? How did you decide how you're going to obtain the knowledge, the Islamic knowledge that you need? And where did you start and where did you go? What was your journey like?
Yeah, excellent question. I have to say, before I start this question, as I was silent and you were asking that question, the sounds, even when I'm speaking now, it's loud for me. I don't know if it comes through. I got 3 kids in the house. They 3 young kids, and so they often have emotions, and I think there's a lot of emotions behind the door right here that might come across on the audio.
No, I couldn't hear you. I couldn't hear them.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Well, I just wanted to note that. But yeah, on to your question of how that came about. I mean, yeah, and I consider myself very blessed and fortunate to be given the time and the aspiration and the opportunity from my creator to be able to memorize his word. From the beginning, when I came to Islam and found something that I could devote my whole self to, that having reached that and experienced that and feel that there's this gift in my life right now, along with it came a deep apprehension of what if this could be taken away from me. And so I remember coming across in the beginning of chapter 3 in the Quran, Surah Al Imran, in those initial verses, the supplication, ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Oh our Lord, don't allow our hearts to be deviated after you've guided us. I used to make that supplication so often because I felt like, wow, like this is such a huge blessing to have been brought to this. And so I was so afraid of backtracking and losing anything that I'd gained. But at the same time, it was a sense then of personal responsibility and individual accountability. I felt of, let me do everything I can to make sure that no one can take this away from me. And so so this was also the time, it was before YouTube and podcasts got big and they became huge distractions away from actually, you think that you're increasing in knowledge watching these things and engaging in this content, but it just goes in one ear and out the other. And it's just constantly, okay, the new lecture and the new there's a saying in the tradition that al-ilm al-mudhakara, knowledge is review. The only way that anything sticks is if you review it, and we don't review. If as soon as we're done with the video, I don't ever want to see that video again. Give me the new content, the fresh thing. So when I came into Islam, I had the fortune of not being so distracted in terms of that, but also I had the sense that there are certain things to gain a foundation in this tradition, such that I can stand on my own feet in this tradition as much as possible. And that's what drives me and gives me passion now to help other people these days stand on their own 2 feet in regards to this tradition as well, rather than just being consumers of religious content on various platforms that we often spend too much time on. And so one of those key things, so that meant several things. That meant I understood from the famous Hadith Jibril, the account of the angel Gabriel, that Islam has 3 dimensions: Islam, Iman, Ihsan. So there's physical and intellectual, body, mind, and soul to tend to. So I wanted to establish, I was keen to get my basics down in those regards, in terms of learning my fiqh properly, my outward worship, learning aqidah, and then learning spirituality, tasawwuf, properly. But then also, at the same time, those first few years being Muslim, I spent time visiting the prisons in the area in New Hampshire and Vermont. I would visit that because often the policy in the prisons was the Muslims couldn't gather for prayer or anything unless there was someone external present. So I would just go as a brother and be with the other brothers in the correctional facilities. And sometimes I would give them books, and like my Arabic textbooks in particular. I just gave my textbooks to them, and then I would come back the next week, and one brother had gotten in an argument with a warden, and so was shipped off to another place, and he happened to be the one holding onto that book, so they all lost access to that book. And I felt, okay, like I need to scramble to make sure no one can take my knowledge away from me. and particularly the Quran. So from that point forward, I had an aspiration of memorizing the Quran. I wanted to be in a place of, I don't want to have to seek anyone's permission to access the words of my creator in any
That's
way.
amazing. That reminds me of Imam Ghazali's experience.
Yeah, right. I can relate to his story. I mean, I certainly don't have his aspiration, and certainly not even a fraction of his knowledge. But
Right.
yeah, his story of being met by the robbers, and he
Yes.
says, "Don't take my books, don't take my books." Right, and then realizing that, well, the robbers say to him apparently in the story, right, why? How could you have such valuable things with you when someone like me can just take them away from
Take them
you?
away.
Right, and it was at that point that he realized he had to commit all his knowledge to memory. Mm.
It's amazing. So, how long did it take to memorize the Quran?
Well, anyone who has had experience trying to or eventually memorizing Quran will tell you that it's always a process that never ends. So, there's a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that this book. I need to review the exact wording, but something like this book is more fleeting than the fleeing camel. Like you have to hold it, and you have to put the
Wow.
reins on it and hold it down, and it takes a lot of work to keep it up.
Wow.
And so I can tell you that it took me about 2 years to complete that first round of memorization, when I recited it in entirety to a teacher from memory, and received from the teacher permission, said, okay, now you have completed your hifz, I've authorized you now, and you can
I
teach
think
this to
that's
others.
amazing. 2
But
years is very quick, even for
yeah,
like a native speaker.
so I can tell you that it took me two years to go through that process, but that was around 10 years ago, and I still I'm on like my fourth round of Quranic memorization, because there are always holes that come up.
Yes.
There's always that initial experience of reciting the whole thing from memory to a teacher is just the beginning of the process.
Yeah.
Because you prep certain surahs and certain sections of the Quran, and then you can set them aside because you've already said them to the teacher. And so it's a lifelong process of just confirming that memorization and being able to do it completely without any aid.
It's true.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of like Hafiz, people who have memorized the Quran, reading it to each other just to make sure, kind of a bit like sharpening their tools to make sure that they kind of stay on top of things.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've had the experience of then 10 years after receiving, like, being officially done with memorization. I've come to the conclusion that if I review everything on a monthly basis, I can reasonably expect that every juz, so every 30th of the Quran, I'll have up to three or four places in that juz which I'll have to review, which I'll make mistakes on. And that's just, there's really nothing I can do about it. It's just, it's a lifelong refining and improving process.
So tell us a bit about the Quran. Tell us. I'll be interested to know, first of all, your first introduction to the Quran. How did you find it? Because the Quran is unlike any books that we know of in the West, because we're familiar with like having a structure where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, whereas Quran's not like that. But also, the Quran is very misunderstood for people, non-Muslims. Quite often, non-Muslims who have never actually touched the Quran, but they have an opinion of the Quran, and it's neglected within Muslims as well. So, tell us a bit about your thoughts on these topics.
Well, so my first experience with the Quran was when I first was trying to teach myself Arabic. So I picked up, there were basically three books I picked up from Barnes and Noble, which was the typical bookstore and bookstore chain in America at the time when I was growing up. Picked up a book on the Arabic alphabet, and then Arabic phrases, just a general introduction to the language. And then I picked up a Quran. It was the Abdullah Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran. That was the one that they had at the bookstore. And I remember reading it for the first time. I would read it before I went to bed. And I got somewhere in the second chapter and then just got fed up with it because I would do that because it was and that's now since then I've heard many people say, and this is the recommendation that I give to anyone reading the Quran, is do not start reading it from beginning to end, because for several reasons. One, that's not the order it was revealed. Typically, what's later in the text was revealed first, and so therefore has to do with more overall general themes. And what's earlier in the written text, if you go page by page through it, is later revelation and has to do with really specific things. And so read the first chapter, then came to the second chapter, and okay, here's interesting. Okay, stories about the Israelites, and then and things about divorce. And wait, what does this have to do with me? And so I got bogged down at first reading it for the first time, and then it was several years later, then when I was in college, that I started reading it seriously again, and especially then, given that I had then started studying Arabic, being able to have that direct relationship with it, because it's tough, because if people want to access the Quran, they don't have experience with it. There is so much beauty and wisdom that comes across in the translation, but every translation is just it's a filter. It's filtered through that translator, and it's only just a tiny fragment of the meaning and import and impact that original Arabic has. And so I think it was the fact that I was able to start accessing it on its own terms to a certain extent, knowing Arabic, that is what started impacting me in general too. But then in particular, it was in stark contrast to the religious texts that I had growing up, particularly the Bible, in which so much of the Bible was just not relevant to me at all and didn't speak to me at all, and didn't even address me. There was, sure, wisdom that I found in it, but even the places that were most relevant, it was stories about things several thousand years ago. Whereas the Quran, reading it, it's speaking directly to me. It's addressing me and calling to me and mentioning my doubts and answering them, and mentioning questions and answering them, and challenging me and speaking directly to me. And it's the voice of God as well, which that's not really present in the Bible. Sure, you have the words of God there, but it's stories, and it's people talking about God, or about talking about people talking about God. So it's several times removed, whereas the Quran is the actual speech of the Creator. And for me, I felt that viscerally reading it, reading it seriously that first time, a few years after my initial engagement with the translation.
So how would you recommend a reader approaching the Quran for the first time? You said don't start from the beginning. So what would you recommend? How would they
well, if they have a translation, read from the end. Start reading chapters backwards. So read chapter 114, then 113, then 112.
Okay.
But also try to engage a bit with the Arabic original too, in terms of maybe just listen. There are all kinds of great YouTube videos of where you can hear the recitation while the translation is displayed. And also there are some pretty good books and resources, like Michael Sell's book, what is it? Approaching the Quran, I think. Or it's a book that then comes with a CD, and he talks about the audio, the experience of hearing the Quran, and the relation between the sounds of the Quran and the meaning, and how intertwined they are. There are great resources like that out there too.
Adnan, thank you so much for your time. Before you go, I'd maybe like to ask you one last question. How did you get introduced to the Prophet ﷺ, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and what journey intellectually did you go through in discovering the personality of the Prophet ﷺ?
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. So My first exposure was really in that Arab culture class, learning a bit about his life history. And once again, as with so many things in Islam, the reading his life, it was so refreshing to have a life like that, and a biography like that, that I felt like I could put my whole self into. Figures like Moses and Jesus Christ in the Bible, they were amazing figures. Similarly, they were prophets and examples for us. But it was just little tiny snippets of their life that you get from texts like that. I mean, look at the New Testament in the Bible, the Gospel. It's like a year or two or three of Jesus' preaching, which is recorded there. What about the 3 decades that he had to, on this earth? And so being able to access an exemplary life like that was so important and profound for me, and so much of a healing too, because I saw such practical advice and such, once again, practical advice on just how to live life in general too, because of all of the different positions that the Prophet, peace be upon him, occupied, in terms of being oppressed, but then being in a position of power, being an orphan, and yet then being a father and a husband, and all of these things. He was just in all these different aspects of human life. He was put through in his short time on this earth, and so there was so much practical advice of how to navigate those things as a human from reading his life that, like I said, it was a healing and a guidance for me. Right.
Amazing. Adnan, thank you so much. We could go on forever. I'm finding this so fascinating, but maybe, inshallah, if life permits, and you have the time, join us again, and we can carry on the discussion. Before we go, do please share any links. You have a podcast. I would advise any listeners, I'll share the links in the notes. I don't mind if you don't subscribe to our channel, but definitely go and subscribe to Adnan's channel. You're going to benefit from it. Adnan, I wish you all the success. May Allah Ta'ala grant you and increase you in knowledge, and may Allah Ta'ala help others benefit from what you have learned.
I mean, yes. Thank you very much for your time today, Tafhim Bhai. I mean, it's been a great pleasure to be with you. It'll be an honor to be back. If you see benefit, or if anyone watching this this conversation of ours sees benefit in it, I'd love to be back, because it's great. I wish we had the opportunity to be in each other's presence physically, and hopefully, inshallah, Allah will give us that opportunity sometime
Inshallah.
soon. But just the time to spend with you in your online presence, here on this conversation, you have such a good heart, and such a clear sense of mission and benefit, and such a sweet compassion in you, Tafhim Bai, that I just love this time speaking with you and being with you virtually. So thank you very much. And may Allah bless you and everyone else who's watching this in this month of Ramadan and beyond.
Ameen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.